let's make a little bit about this. First of all, your thoughts on the Confederate History Month being proposed by Virginia's governor.
Well, I think, and I could be wrong, it's one woman's opinion.
One woman's opinion.
One woman's opinion. There's been a wave across the country since President Obama entered office. And this anti-federal government wave is not new. There have been anti-federal government waves in the past, going all the way back to when we went from the Articles of Confederation to the United States Constitution in 1787. I think this is a little different because it is race-based, in my opinion, one woman's opinion. And one reason why I believe it's race-based is because we're dealing with issues of race that have been unresolved for centuries. And in particular, over the last 40 years, since the Civil Rights Act and other ways in which the African Americans have progressed, it's making a lot of people of European descent in this country have a nervous breakdown, basically an identity crisis. They're wondering who they are and where is their source of power. Because many of them, even though they've never said it, actually believe this is their country. And so the Civil War from 1861 to 1865, that was something that does need more research. And one thing that Governor McDonnell has been saying is like he just wants us to go back and research those who sacrificed their lives during the Civil War. But if you read the cornerstone speech that was given, one of the major reasons for the secession of the states was because they believed that African Americans were wholly unequal to whites, and therefore they did not want to be forced to have them, African Americans, have equal rights with white people in this country.
Let's take a listen to what Governor McDonnell had to say. This is a statement that actually Governor McDonnell had in his 7-page declaration of April as Confederate History Month in Virginia. He calls for Virginians to understand the sacrifices of the Confederate leaders and soldiers, as well as citizens during the period of the Civil War. McDonnell says he didn't include a reference to slavery because there were any number of aspects to that conflict between the states. Obviously, he says, it involved slavery. It also involved other issues, but I focused on the ones I thought which were most significant to Virginia. Now, I've got relatives in Virginia who are black. I've got several relatives in Virginia who are black, and they've all called me talking about, listen, when you talk about Virginia, we are Virginians, and they feel as an insult of the governor's comments. Should the African-American community, should the black community, and should America as a whole be insulted by the governor's proposal and his comments?
I think there should be not only an insult, there should be some political action. Too much has happened since Barack Obama has ascended to the presidency for us as African Americans to ignore it. Americans' racial history has shown that actions follow words. This is not a country in which people have idly talked about injuring black people or wanting to go back to another time when we were oppressed. That identity crisis, that conflict in this country is something that we have not been able to address because we've been fearful of addressing it. We didn't have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like South Africa did. We didn't have anything that actually looked at race. Bill Clinton tried during his presidency to have a conversation about race, but it was something he did almost as a personal executive action. It was not something taken up by the country itself. We have all these unresolved issues of race, and what a lot of white Americans, especially Tea Party members and other people in these other fringe groups are saying, basically is, we want the country we used to have when black people did not have power, when we did not have a black president. And the one area they keep going back to is the time when there was the South, where slaves exist, where you had this social or racial hierarchy that found people of color at the bottom, not just African Americans, but also Native Americans, Latinos, and everybody else. But they forget that the Jamestown colony was founded in 1607 by English. That's true. But by 1619, Africans had been introduced into that colony. And without the help of those Africans, without the help of the Native Americans, that colony would not have survived. It was dying off within that short time period of 1607 to 1619. Now, Africans had been in North America prior to this, but we're talking about this country. As white people say their country, or certain white people, not all of them, and I don't want to, generalize type way. But these people who are saying, let's go back to a time of the Confederacy, what they're saying is, let's go back to a time when we had our place of power.
How much of a setback is this for America?
I think it's a major setback. I mean, we are the last standing superpower of the 20th century. People around the world watch what we do. We think we're at home and, you know, just having debates about race in a vacuum. People around the world see that we still have these major issues of race, and they wonder what type of world leader this country is supposed to be when it cannot resolve the fact that people of color, when they progress to a particular level, should be treated financially, socially, whatever, with what comes, those benefits that come with a position. And unfortunately, for some whites in fringe groups and other whites without joining fringe groups, but believe it anyway, they believe that if you see whites unemployed, then that means somebody African-American took their job. There's been centuries of an unlevel playing field. And now that the playing field is evening up just a little tiny bit, you see this kind of backlash. And this is historical. There has been a backlash to black progress since we've been progressing. What I like to say, and that's why I wrote my book, Race, Law, and American Society, 1607 to Present, is to show the role of law, the role of political power, but also show how people of African descent have progressed anyway. Mm-hmm. In spite of that, and we'll progress in spite of this, but it's indicative of this American history that we would have a governor without shame proclaim this. And if you have a chance to look on the internet and see some of the horrible statements being made in support of this Confederate History Month, that there are groups out there who are now using this as their war cry to say, yes, we need to go back to a time period when African Americans were in a lower social and political echelon or treated as chattel, because that's where they should be. These are people who have an identity that's based on their thought that they're better than we are, which is fine. You can think you're the best person in the world. I think African Americans are the best people in the world. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean I'm going to go denigrate another group because I think my group is great. You could be Irish. Irish might be the greatest in your mind, whatever it is. What concerns me is when we take our pride in self and then we have to step on someone else in order to feel good about ourselves. And that's what I think this Confederate History Month is about. It's about trying to step on other people and feel better about a time when they were lesser than.
You got your book right there, and I want to lift it up too. It talks about the U.S. Constitution. It gives a little breakdown and talks about the contributions in regards to the Constitution to deal with the African American, well, blacks and African Americans back in the day. Share with us a little bit about that right quick.
Well, one thing that you mentioned, the 13th Amendment, for example. 13th Amendment did abolish slavery in 1865. However, it abolished it except as punishment for a crime. So basically it was a compromise. We're going to allow these Africans to be free, but we're going to use the criminal justice system to keep them in their place and keep their progress from getting past what whites wanted it to be. So now African Americans are then suffering as victims of the black codes, criminal laws, loitering, trespass, etc., in which they're convicted and now their labor can be used for free as part of the convict lease system. When we talk about the disproportionate numbers of people of color in prison today, this is not generational. It's not one or two generations. This started over a century ago, and it's been part of a way to impede our progress using the criminal justice system. So the Constitution is made up of compromises. The framers had compromises. Not all the framers were slaveholders, but there are parts of the Constitution that we need to discuss in our communities because the Tea Party members are discussing the Constitution. And they're discussing it in a very convoluted way in which they read the Constitution to be we the people, meaning the people only meant them, and that we were never supposed to be protected by the Constitution as we think of it today.